So the NHL All-Star break is over, shorter than in years past, obviously, with the NHL having to make up games, but regular season games resume tonight, and I guess the next big date in the season is the March 21st trade deadline. With us now entering trade season over the next month and a half, I figured it would be fun to look at one trade candidate from every NHL team. So it's one player from every NHL team that I could see potentially getting moved, and maybe if you guys show enough support on this video, let's say if we hit 2,000 likes, I'll do another video like this where I go over one player that I think every NHL team should trade for. So I think that could be kind of fun. Let me know if that's something that you guys would want to see. I usually do these videos in alphabetical order, but I'll change things up today just for the sake of changing things up. We'll start in the Eastern Conference and finish out in the Western Conference. Starting us off, we have the 16 seed Montreal Canadiens in the Eastern Conference, and with the season that they're having, realistically, they should be open to trading everybody with the exception, of course, of the likes of Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield. Realistically, I could see the Montreal Canadiens moving a handful of players, but I feel like the most likely candidate to be moved is defenseman Ben Chiarot, who of course is not having a great season, but there isn't really anybody on Montreal that is. Ben Chiarot is the type of defenseman that thrives in a playoff environment when the refs kind of put their whistle away a little bit and he can get away with things that he probably wouldn't get away with in the regular season. He's playoff tested, obviously went to the Stanley Cup Finals with the Montreal Canadiens in 2021. I feel like there's a lot of teams that would be interested in him, similar to how David Savard was one of the more sought after rentals at last year's trade deadline. Next up, we have the 15 seed Ottawa Senators, and for their trade candidate, I'm actually going to go with Tyler Ennis. He's set to become a UFA at the end of the season. He's only making $900K, so basically any team in the league could fit that under the cap. He's actually having a pretty solid season, 18 points in 35 games, so a little over a half point per game pace for Tyler Ennis. Now, Tyler Ennis is obviously not the kind of trade piece that would put a contender over the top and, be the final piece they need to make a legit run, but he can obviously add some depth to any forward core in the league. He's a player that we've seen traded on deadline day before when the Oilers actually acquired him from the Ottawa Senators. Also, he's definitely not a player that's going to cost a lot. If he is traded, I can't imagine it being for anything more than like a 4th or a 5th round pick. The New Jersey Devils, I'm going to go with defenseman Damon Severson. It feels like he's been in trade rumors for years now. He's heading into the final year of his contract next season. He makes a little over $4.15 million a season. He's a right shot, puck moving defenseman, is capable of quarterbacking a first or second power play unit. I could definitely see a team out there that maybe lacks some offense from the blue line taking a run at Severson. Not sure if he's a guy that fits into the New Jersey Devils' long-term plans. If they do go the route of trading him, I feel like it would be smarter to do it this season so that the team that acquires him would also get him for next season. He wouldn't just be a pure rental. I feel like the Devils will get more for him that way. The Buffalo Sabres, this was actually kind of a tough one. They don't really have too many tradable pieces because a lot of the valuable pieces that they have are going to be Buffalo Sabres most likely for a long time. For their trade candidate, I'm going to go with veteran center Cody Eakin. Makes $2.25 million, is set to become a UFA at the end of the season. Another guy that, like Tyler Ennis, we have seen dealt at the trade deadline before. I believe a couple of years ago Winnipeg acquired him at the deadline. Again, certainly not a player who would really move the needle all that much, if at all, but he adds some depth. He's been on a long playoff run before. He went to the Cup final with Vegas in their inaugural season, so I could see the Sabres getting a late round pick for him. The Philadelphia Flyers, their trade candidate is the captain Claude Giroux, who I feel like is going to be one of the more interesting names to follow from now leading up to the deadline. Now, obviously, Giroux has a full no movement clause built into his contract, so it's completely up to him if he wants to get traded, and if he does, where he wants to end up. He's in the final year of his contract. He's going to be a UFA at the end of the season. Obviously, the Philadelphia Flyers aren't going to be anywhere near playoff contention, so if getting traded is the route that Claude Giroux wants to take and the Flyers are willing to accommodate him on that, there's going to be contenders lining up for his services because he's exactly the type of player who could be the missing piece for a lot of teams. The New York Islanders, this is a really tough one for me because while they are a good bit out of the playoff race, I feel like Lou Lamoriello isn't the kind of GM that's going to throw in the towel and sell off pieces at the deadline. I feel like he's going to try and go for it for as long as he can, but with the season that the Islanders are having, you also can't really justify buying at the deadline either, so I feel like the Islanders are going to be a pretty quiet team over the deadline. I don't really see them making any moves, so this is one of the few teams in the video where I have nobody as their trade candidate. The Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm definitely going with goaltender Joonas Korpisalo. We know that he's likely leaving Columbus in the offseason as a free agent. He kind of voiced his displeasure when they signed Elvis Merzlikins to that big contract extension. Really don't think he has a future in Columbus, so if there is a market for goaltenders at the deadline, I feel like it would be pretty smart for Columbus to try and capitalize on that. Joonas Korpisalo is a guy who's had some big moments in the playoffs. Obviously, I think he holds the NHL record for most saves in a single playoff game. In the bubble, he basically basically single-handedly beat the Toronto Maple Leafs. So again, if there is a market for goaltenders over the next month or so, I feel like this is a guy that would garner some interest. The Detroit Red Wings, for their trade candidate, I definitely have to go with Nick Leddy. Honorable mention to Vlad Namestnikov, but I feel like Leddy is more likely to be dealt out of the two. He's a veteran defenseman, has won a Stanley Cup before. Obviously, the past 2 postseasons, he's been on deep playoff runs with the New York Islanders. Now, I also could see a scenario where Detroit kind of just stands pat and doesn't decide to move Nick Leddy if they don't get an offer that they feel is fair, because remember, Detroit did actually give up a second-round pick for Leddy in the offseason, so I feel like they'd probably want to get at least a second back. The Boston Bruins, pretty easy one here. Jake DeBrusk, reason being, he requested a trade earlier in the season, and although he's actually been playing better since then, and he's actually been getting more ice time since then, he's still a guy that I feel like Boston would include in a trade if they want to swing for some of the bigger rentals at the deadline. Maybe a guy like Claude Giroux, who we already talked about, or a Joe Pavelski, a Thomas Hertl, one of those guys. The Washington Capitals, this is a bit of a weird one. I decided to go with defenseman Dennis Cholowski, who they acquired off of waivers from the Seattle Kraken earlier in the season. When the Washington Capitals are fully healthy, Dennis Cholowski is not in their top 6 in terms of their D-core. He's probably not even their 7th defenseman, and although Dennis Cholowski doesn't have much trade value, if any at all, seeing as the Washington Capitals literally got him for free off of waivers, I could still see him being a throw-in in a trade if the Capitals want to go after a rental at the deadline, seeing as Cholowski was a former first-round pick, and there is still, I feel like, a little bit of offensive upside there. Next up, we have the Maple Leafs. I definitely have to go with Nick Ritchie here. Obviously, that whole experiment hasn't worked out. They placed him on waivers earlier in the season. He went unclaimed, so obviously he has basically zero value. However, I do feel like the Maple Leafs aren't done trying to get rid of Ritchie. I could see them maybe attaching a draft pick to him, trading him to a team like the Coyotes or something to try and free up some cap space so that they can pursue some other options around the deadline. The Pittsburgh Penguins are another team where I'm actually going with nobody. Obviously, they have some pretty intriguing names that are set to become UFAs at the end of the season, the likes of Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Brian Rust, but there's absolutely no way that the Pittsburgh Penguins look to trade any of those guys given the position that they are in right now. They have had a fantastic regular season. I just can't see the Penguins trading one of those guys and actively making their roster worse when, with the current team that they have, they look like legit contenders. The New York Rangers, a really easy one here. It's got to be Vitaly Krasov, their 9th overall pick from the 2018 NHL draft. Obviously, he requested a trade after not making the New York Rangers out of training camp. He's over playing in the KHL now, where he's having a pretty decent season. I would still consider him one of the New York Rangers' top prospects, so if they look to swing for the fences at the deadline and try to get one of the bigger name players available, he's definitely a guy that I think they're going to try to get rid of in a trade like that. The Carolina Hurricanes, I'm actually going to go with Jack Drury, who was a second-round pick by them in 2018. He's played in 2 games for the Hurricanes this season where he has 2 goals. He's producing at a pretty decent rate in the American Hockey League as well. I went with him because I can't see the Carolina Hurricanes moving anybody off of their active roster. They probably want to keep that team intact. They're having a great season. They look like contenders. So if the Carolina Hurricanes want to bolster their team up even more without taking anyone off the active roster and without trading one of their absolute top prospects, I feel like Jack Drury is a likely candidate given the upside that he has shown in his short stint in the NHL this season and the fact that he plays the center position. The Tampa Bay Lightning, another team where I'm going with nobody. I feel like their most likely trade candidate is just their draft picks. I can't really see them moving anyone off of the active roster. They don't really have, one of those top prospects that they could move out if they want to go after one of the bigger name players, and they don't really have the cap space for that either. I really don't see the Lightning being as active at this year's deadline as they have been over the past couple of years, where 2 years ago they got Coleman and Goudreau, and last year they got David Savard. And now for the final team in the Eastern Conference, the Florida Panthers. For their trade candidate, I'm going with Owen Tippett, who is a top 10 selection by them in the 2017 NHL draft. Hasn't really panned out, I'm sure, the way they would have liked, and he hasn't really been given that much of an opportunity to play in the top 6 because, Florida is obviously loaded up front with forwards. He's a player who has actively been in trade rumors over the past couple of weeks. He's definitely expendable. If you're the Florida Panthers, they don't need him at all. So if he's a piece that they could add in a trade to try and hit a home run, I feel like that's definitely something that they would do. Moving on now to the Western Conference, the 16 seed Arizona Coyotes, and I know the title of this video is one trade candidate from every team, but my answer for Arizona is literally the entire team. I really don't think there's any one player on that team that the Coyotes view as untouchable. If they're willing to listen to offers on Jacob Chychrun, I feel like they're probably willing to listen to offers on anybody. The Seattle Kraken, I'm definitely going with Calle Jarnkrok as their most likely trade candidate. He's set to become a UFA at the end of the season. He's cheap, only making $2 million. He's a guy that I feel like would benefit almost any contending team. He chips in a little bit of offense here and there. He's had 4 seasons in his career with 15 plus goals. He's always been very reliable defensively. He's been on deep playoff runs. He's definitely not going to be one of the bigger names name players available over the next month and a half, but I feel like he could definitely be a sneaky addition, and you probably wouldn't have to give up a ton to bring him in either. The Chicago Blackhawks definitely going with goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury in the final year of his contract, and considering the fact that the Blackhawks got him for really cheap, it would just be good asset management to move on from him if you get a sufficient offer. It really just seems inevitable that he's going to wind up being an Edmonton Oiler by the trade deadline, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The Winnipeg Jets, a team having a pretty disappointing season. I feel like they're kind of in the same boat as the New York Islanders, where I really can't see them throwing in the towel and selling. I feel like they're probably just going to stand pat, but I am going to give a trade candidate here. I'm going to go with Andrew Kopp. He's on just a one-year deal, going to be a UFA at the end of the season. He makes $3.64 million, which is very cheap for how good of a player he is. It's likely that he leaves Winnipeg in the offseason as a free agent anyways. I just can't see them being able to give him the kind of money that other teams are going to offer him. So if the Winnipeg Jets want to retool a little bit and don't feel like they have a legit shot at the playoffs this year, I feel like he's a guy that they probably should move. The Vancouver Canucks definitely have to go with JT Miller as their trade candidate. He's been in the center of trade rumors over the past couple of weeks, and even though I don't see them trading him, at least in the middle of the season, I feel like if they are going to move him, it'll be an off-season move. But just based off of the fact that he's been in trade talks so much lately, I feel like I had to go with him as their trade candidate. The San Jose Sharks definitely have to go with centerman Thomas Hertl. I know the Sharks are in the playoff race right now, but you cannot risk losing a player like Hertl for nothing. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the season. Based off of the season he's having right now, I feel like there's going to be a lot of teams throwing a lot of money at him. His value is incredibly high. I feel like it would be a huge mistake for the San Jose Sharks not to capitalize on that and lose him for nothing in the offseason. Moving on now to the Dallas Stars, a team I'm really interested to follow leading up to the trade deadline. I'm going to give an honorable mention to Joe Pavelski. With the season that he's having, it seems like it would almost be foolish for the Dallas Stars not to capitalize on that and move him at the deadline. So I think Pavelski is going to be an interesting name to follow, and for their most likely candidate, I'm going to go with John Klingberg, just based off of the fact that it was reported on he requested a trade. I believe it was a couple of weeks ago or maybe a month or so ago now, and apparently the Dallas Stars are actively trying to trade John Klingberg. I feel like it's almost a guarantee that he's dealt before the deadline, so he's my most likely trade candidate from them, but keep an eye on Pavelski as well. The Edmonton Oilers, I'm going with goaltender Mikko Koskinen. It just makes sense that if they're going to go out and try to acquire somebody like a Marc-Andre Fleury, you probably have to move some money out. I feel like Mikko Koskinen would be a likely candidate to go the other way, along with maybe a prospect and a draft pick or two. The Calgary Flames, for them I'm going with Dylan Dubé, who isn't really having the greatest season, only has 4 goals in 42 games after scoring 11 in 51 last year. I still feel like this is a player who has the capability of being a perennial, 15 to 20 goal scorer. He can play both the center position and the wing up front. He's on a pretty decent contract, so that has to add a little bit of value to him as well. It just isn't seeming to work out in Calgary. If they want to go for one of the bigger rentals at the deadline, I definitely feel like he's a likely candidate to be included in the package going the other way. The Anaheim Ducks are a team in a pretty weird spot because they have a lot of guys that are set to become UFAs at the end of the season that I feel like would get a lot of interest and they'd probably get significant returns for, but they're in a playoff spot right now. But are they in a position to, if they get into the playoffs, actually go on a deep run? I personally don't think so, but obviously you don't want to completely gut your team if you're in a playoff spot. For their most likely trade candidate, I'm going to go with Josh Manson, veteran defenseman, right shot, which come at a premium. He's going to be a UFA at the end of the season. I feel like this is a guy that would get a ton of interest, so this would allow the Ducks to maybe get a pick or two or some prospects in return while still keeping the majority of the team intact, and I feel like they'd still be able to, compete and stay in the playoff hunt without Josh Manson. But if you were to trade a guy like Hampus Lindholm or Rickard Rakell, I don't think that would be the case. The Los Angeles Kings, another team like the Ducks that are in a pretty interesting spot right now. For their trade candidate, I'm actually going to go with Elias Anderson, who they gave up a second-round pick for at, I believe, the 2020 NHL draft. Since being acquired, he hasn't really been able to crack the Kings as a full-time member. They're pretty deep down the middle, obviously, with Anze Kopitar and Philip Deneau, and then you have the likes of Quentin Byfield and Alex Turcotte as well, so he's pretty far down the depth chart. So if the LA Kings are looking to buy at the deadline and bolster their team for the ending stretch and into the postseason, he's definitely a guy that I could see them maybe moving. The Vegas Golden Knights, another team where I'm going with nobody. They already made their big splash acquiring Jack Eichel. Their deadline acquisition is basically just going to be getting Jack Jack Eichel back healthy, I really can't see them doing much, if anything at all, because I mean, they've traded the majority of their assets and they don't really have any cap space. The St. Louis Blues, for their trade candidate, I'm still going to go with Vladimir Tarasenko because it was reported on a couple of weeks ago that he still would like the St. Louis Blues to fulfill his trade request, even though he's having a great season individually and the Blues as a team are performing really well. So it seems like he still wants his future to be somewhere other than St. Louis. That being said, though, I can't see them trading him mid-season with the season that they're having and with how well Tarasenko is performing. If they are going to make good on his trade request, I feel like that's something we're going to see happen in the offseason. The Minnesota Wild, a pretty interesting one here. I'm actually going to go with defenseman prospect Carson Lambos, who was their first round pick from the most recent NHL draft. My thought process here was I can't see them wanting to take anyone off the active roster. I feel like they want to keep that team together because they're performing so well, they're clicking so well, and also if they want to go after one of the bigger name rentals like a Pavelski, Giroux, Hurdle, etc., I can't see them trading a guy like Matthew Boldy or Marco Rossi or even Jesper Wallstedt. So if they want to go big and really load up for the playoffs without trading the likes of Boldy, Wallstedt, or Marco Rossi, I feel like you almost have to include Lambos or maybe a guy like Kalen Addison, and then you probably have to add draft picks. The Nashville Predators. Now this is an interesting team because if you were to ask me before the season started, I would have said Philip Forsberg is going to be a really intriguing name to watch around the deadline because I didn't think Nashville was going to be a good team at all, but here they are. You know, after the All-Star break, the second seed in the Western Conference, only behind the Avalanche. There's no way they trade Philip Forsberg while they're having this type of season, so I just decided to go with nobody as their most likely trade candidate because I feel like they're most likely going to stand pat, and if anything, they're probably going to try to look to add a little bit. And now to finish out the video with, in my opinion, the best team in the National Hockey League. They're 9-0-1 in their last 10, the Colorado Avalanche. This is like a perfectly built team. I mean, can you even make this team better? Are they even going to look to add anything at the deadline? For their most likely trade candidate, I'm going to go with Shane Bowers. He was their first round pick from 2017, and he's actually the only first rounder from that draft that has yet to appear in an NHL game, so he really hasn't got an opportunity yet. I could see maybe Colorado moving him just for the sake of giving him a change of scenery. So that is going to wrap up today's video. That was one trade candidate from every single NHL team, kind of course, with the exception of a few. Trade season and the trade deadline is one of my favorite times every year. As somebody who creates content, I love trades. It's extremely fun to talk about. I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on what you think your favorite team is going to do around the deadline. Are they going to be buyers? Are they going to be sellers? Who do you think is the most likely trade candidate from your team? All of your thoughts like that, leave them down below in the comment section. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please drop a like on this video. Like I said, if we can get 2,000 likes, I will make a video on one player that every team should trade for. And if this is your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all soon.